Hi. So in the previous video, we talked about how even after you've effectively mastered a second language, that you're still not going to have the same association with the taboo words in your second language as you would in your first language, that they're just not going to have the same emotional force for you. But in this one, we're going to be targeting a different question, and that is, how do or should people learn about taboo words in their second language? So we're going to be looking at learning. And we've got a couple of questions. First of all, this is a question that I've always asked in the face-to-face class, or actually my guest lecturer, Rachel Hayes-Harb, has asked this question: is swearing taught in second language classes? And I imagine that most of you have taken a foreign language class. So my question then is, in those classrooms, whether it was in high school or college, were you taught either to swear or about swearing? Was it present in the authentic dialogues, right? So we've seen this. People swear. And it's pretty pervasive that people swear, right? In public, in private, and so on. And so these foreign language classes typically try to have you practice these so-called authentic dialogues. But Professor Hayes-Harb's point is that a lot of the time, these dialogues are artificial because they don't include the very, salty language that people usually use. And then another question is, do they actually, do your professors actually discuss the definitions and the rules involved with swearing? So we talked about this, that swearing can be used in sort of unusual ways. We saw this with syntax, that fuck can go in unusual places, and its part of speech is somewhat unpredictable and perhaps even a little irregular. And so it would seem that if students are actually going to learn it, they may need to consciously learn some of these rules. And so again, the question is, when your professors, if they ever talk about swearing, do they go over the rules and how it's done and what are the definitions and so on? So in order to learn more about what actually goes on in the classroom, Holsten 2005 performed the study of English as a second language teacher. So that's what this ESOL here stands for, English as a second language teachers in New Zealand, and their attitudes towards taboo words and teaching taboo words. And what she found was that most of them did not say that they would never teach it at all. There were some, clearly, who said that they just wouldn't even touch it. But the vast majority of the teachers said that they would only discuss taboo words when the students bring it up. Otherwise, they're going to ignore it. And so it's only going to be if they're asked a question about it, essentially. Some of them indicated that they would discuss taboo words when they felt that it was needed in the lesson. So I would guess that this would be, for example, if it came up in an actual authentic dialogue, or, for example, if they were reading a book or watching a movie, and then maybe the professor would feel the need to address it. And very few, probably even fewer than never said that they have a specific swearing lesson where they actually teach about swearing in their class. Now, Holsten put it this way, that taboos about language use extend to the treatment of taboo words in the L2 classroom. So in other words, right, the words themselves are taboo, we understand that, but that tabooness then extends to even discussing them. And we've talked about this, how scholars traditionally have avoided discussing taboo words at all. There's been a taboo against investigating taboo words. And that extends to the L2 classroom. And so when Professor Hayes-Harb has talked about this with her students, so her specialty is in language acquisition, and she works with a lot of teachers in preparation, so people who are going to become second language teachers. So a lot of her students are training to be second language teachers. And here are some of the statements that she's gotten from her students. One would say, I never teach my students to use bad language. And notice this very prescriptive word here, bad language, right? And then another one said, I'm too embarrassed to say those words in front of my students. And Holsten got some similar points here. So one of the teachers in Holsten's survey said, I rarely teach about swear words because students can understand insults and only look silly trying to swear for real. Another one said, I seriously doubt that many of those students swear in their first language. I'm sure the majority would be uncomfortable being exposed to taboo words. Well, this one actually kind of makes me laugh a little bit because I think that's fairly naive, that this teacher believes that their students don't swear in their first language, because that's probably unlikely. As we've seen, it seems that it's not unusual for people, especially young people, to swear. And then I'm sure the majority would be uncomfortable being exposed to taboo words. I mean, this is assuming a lot about the students, but it's also interesting because it's kind of neglecting what we were discussing in the previous presentation, that it's not going to be as powerful for them. When they discuss it in that ESL classroom, it's probably not going to be as uncomfortable for them because it's not going to have that same emotional power for them. Now here's another one that Holsten got, and I find this one just a little staggering. It's extremely difficult to teach about taboos. It's extremely difficult to teach about taboo words. The appropriate and inappropriate and different contexts to use for swear words are difficult to define. For this reason, I don't teach them in the classroom situation. Wow, that's a very strange attitude for a teacher to take. This topic is just too difficult to understand, so I'm not going to teach it. Right? Imagine a physics teacher saying that, this is too complicated, I'm not going to teach about this. Or, a mathematician saying, oh, calculus is too challenging, I'm not going to teach calculus. Right? That's why we teach these things, is because they are challenging, because students do have a hard time picking up on the language. Now here is one that I think I can relate to a little bit better. If you are not going to be offended by these words, then I have no problem teaching you these words. On the other hand, if you're going to be offended and potentially cause me hassles with my job, then go somewhere else to learn swear words. Okay, now, I can understand. This is a job to this person, and if the students, or, if we imagine a high school scenario, the parents of the students are going to complain, then, I can understand. This may not be a good idea. But there's probably ways around it, which we will discuss in a moment. Here's one that I thought was interesting because it's a different perspective than the ones we've looked at so far. Students must understand what they hear. They don't have to produce it. It can be very embarrassing to be in a situation where a native speaker is using swear words to insult a foreign language learner who has no idea of what's happening. Right? Now, this is an argument for why it should be taught. And notice that at the very beginning, they make this distinction that Professor Hayes-Harb considers to be very important, as I do as well, that they don't have to produce it. We're not necessarily teaching, we're not advocating teaching to swear, we're advocating teaching about swearing, so that the students have the resources, the tools to understand what's going on, and also potentially to avoid the words, right? Because that can also be problematic, where a student may not realize the power of certain words. And I think that most people who learn a second language have this experience at some point. I only realized recently, after 10 years of speaking Hungarian, that the word gush that I had been using fairly freely was actually a fairly offensive word. It means shut up, which in English to me is not a very taboo expression. But apparently in Hungarian it's fairly taboo, at least according to my friend. And I feel bad now that I probably offended some people in public when I said the word. Maybe not my friends who knew that I was joking, but other people may have been offended. And I feel bad about that because, you know, I don't go about trying to offend people. Mercury, 1995, has argued for an increased attention to taboo language in ESL classes. And as she puts it, incomplete knowledge of swearing can create confusion for learners. There are some instructional texts out there that deal with taboo language use. And this is another question that I've got for you is, well, how do we deal with it in the classroom then? If, as Professor Hayes-Harb has argued, and and I agree with her, it should be taught in the classroom. Well, what's the best way to deal with it? And that's something I want to leave to you to think about. You know, how would you deal with it in the classroom? Professor Hayes-Harb has said that she has scheduled specific time in her classroom, which she announces ahead of time, like a week ahead of time, and says, okay, on such and such a date, we're going to be discussing swearing. If you're uncomfortable with it, you are not required to show up for that class. And that's how she deals with it. But I want you to think in your own mind, what do you think is the best way to deal with it? Going back to that question that person had, or that comment that teacher had, that if it's going to be a problem for me, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to teach you if you're going to give me any hassles about it after. So here are some books that have tried to deal with it in more or less serious ways. This one is a more serious one, although it's probably for more advanced students. This one is actually not serious. This was a gift, actually, from my wife. When I first started teaching this class, she got me this book. And it's ostensibly serious, but when you start reading it, it's not that serious. So he's got the example, "Bastard to you, you big hell. Statements like the above will peg you as a novice swearer. Bad improvising is worse than no swearing at all. Use the expressions given in this book until you feel completely at ease with swearing. Then you can show originality without sounding like an asshole." And then there's books like this, and these have become increasingly popular, it seems. There's a whole series of these in all sorts of different languages to give you the taboo words. I guess they're semi-serious, but they're not intended for a classroom experience. These seem to be for self-learning or people who are perhaps traveling. But they're probably useful, assuming that the information in them is accurate, I guess. That's always my concern, is that people sometimes have incomplete knowledge of what they're writing about, and that can be dangerous as well. All right, that does it for this presentation. And like I said, I'm going to leave some of these questions a little open-ended for you to discuss and think about on your own.